That's a great question. With the economic one, you mentioned the Soviet central planning, and I am actually persuaded by that, I have to say. When I look at a country like it's nice to take places that are in many respects similar culturally, but they have different economic systems. Unfortunately, they have different political systems as well, so it's hard to really pin it down. But you look at North and South Korea, you look at Hong Kong and mainland China, you look at East and West Germany, and at least you can say this, I think, that the combined system of Marxism plus central planning was not as effective economically as the kind of market system. So it's hard to get controlled experiments in these things, but as far as they go, I find those fairly persuasive myself as far as, the economy. The central planning, I mean, it's interesting. You never know what the future holds, and we are now at the stage where information technology is getting so sophisticated that maybe sometime in the future, central planning, quite differently to how the Soviets envisaged it, might become feasible again. And so that's an interesting question for the future, but I don't think we're anywhere near that yet. So I'm kind of persuaded about the pragmatic usefulness of the market system over and above those other things. With democracy, I think a key question is, does democracy help vulnerable people or help the weak, we might put it that way, without meaning any patronizing? I mean, it's a tribute to Nietzsche that if you talk about the weak, it sounds patronizing. I don't mean it that way. I just mean that some people are more powerful than others in this world, and that's just a fact. So I think a key thing about democracy is, does it protect vulnerable people? And I think it doesn't necessarily, because if you have populist governments, if you have a kind of social atmosphere which doesn't care about people who are weak or marginalized, I don't see anything in democracy that will necessarily make it care for the weak or the disadvantaged people in the world. Now, historically, it has done so. It's had a better record than kind of totalitarian states, and at least in some dimensions. And I think that's probably because democracy is empowered to be what I'd call good democracy when it has an idea, when this idea that people are fundamentally equal is not just at voting time, but it actually permeates the system, that people have fundamentally equal value. When that's in place, I think democracy is a very good system. But as that wanes, or as that perishes through time, I'm not so sure what that will mean for democracy. I have a really interesting tutorial that I take my classes with. I'd love to talk about if I can do that. Good. Yeah, sure. So what I do is, there was this great article about fixing up pollution in the world. This was a serious proposition by some academics, that we breed everybody to be half the size and we have patches on our hands to stop us like eating meat. So if you were to shrink everybody into dwarfs and make everybody eat plant-based food, you would reduce the environmental impact of the population of the world enormously, maybe even halve it, because the ecological footprint of us depends a lot on our mass and on our size. So anyway, this was suggested as a serious alternative to other policies they had in mind, talking about global warming. But the point stands, even if you're just talking about pollution. And so I give this to my classes and I say, who agrees with this being a compulsory policy, that we breed people to be smaller? And can you guess how many people support it, Paul?
Almost nobody.
That's right. Nobody supports it. So I then ask them, who believes in breeding animals and as, providing no cruelty is involved, it's just for breeding animals and you treat them pretty well. And about half of the people do. So I ask that half, okay, if you believe it's okay to breed animals, why don't you believe it's okay to breed people? And they can't usually answer it. They fluff around for a while. So eventually I just put it to them and I say, look, you think people are more valuable than animals, don't you? And they say, yes, we do. And then I say, why? And there are three answers that come up. The first answer is some kind of spiritual or religious answer. So as a Christian, this is the one I would hold, that people are a special creation by God, so they have special dignity relative to animals. Animals are not, animals are important, but people have a sort of supreme dignity. And there are other religions or spiritual aspects which affirm that. So that's one group of answers. The next group of answers is that it's an illusion. We're not actually more valuable than animals, but because just like dogs might look after other dogs and preferences to cats, or herd animals might look after each other in the herd, we look after each other. And part of that is the delusory belief that we're more valuable than animals, but it's a lie. And then the third belief, and this is by far and away the most common one, is that we are more valuable than animals because of our greater capacities. So capacities for relationships, dexterity, creativity, all these things. Even if you allow animals have a certain amount of these, it's clear, I think self-evident, that humans are have a far greater abundance of many of these capacities. And that, I think, is the most popular view. The one about it being an illusion runs into the problem of Jean-Paul Sartre called bad faith, where you continue to believe something, that people are more valuable than animals, but you know the reason you have for believing it is a lie. And that's a kind of corrosive of your own integrity, really. So the third answer is really the one that I think flies the best. So I said, okay, we're more valuable than animals because of our greater capacities. So I say, what about applying that criteria that you've just decried across species within species? Are people equal? Are they fundamentally equal? And that's when the conversation gets very interesting. And I think that ultimately clear thinking people, if they reject any kind of spiritual notion or any kind of spiritual purpose for the human race, will find it very difficult to not assert that people actually aren't equal or aren't equally valuable. And some of my students actually say that. They say, oh, on reflection, I think people aren't equal or aren't equally valuable. And that, I think, is the big difference between democracy and sexual and market freedom. I think democracy still holds on to that, at least at voting time, and maybe at other times. It still holds on to that idea that people have fundamental equal value. But I don't think market economics and sexual freedom has any pretensions that people are equal. And I think that particularly, and perhaps we've always accepted that for markets, but what's relatively new is in the sexual arena, we don't think that people are all equally valuable and deserve equal treatment.